you've invested in some incredible companies. Why do you think that you've been successful in spotting these companies?
I had to be very honest with myself in terms of I don't know what I don't know.
Yeah.
But I'm going to get there.
Yeah.
I remember when like kids would play out and I'd be at home with my dad reading The Economist and people would be like,
Oh my
okay.
God.
From the age of 8, we would literally be reading the Financial Times together, reading The Economist. So 2012, 2013, I actually started what was at the time, I guess, I was trying to build Bloomberg for Africa. And so I'd done a few deals in the UK and they said, look, why don't you go to Japan and help some of these companies with their expansion into Japan and broader Asia? And so I was like, yeah, I'm going. You can fall into this habit of just focusing on the optics of fundraising. When you fundraise, that's just one milestone. The work really starts once that money's in the bank, because then you have to deliver on that. Welcome to The Startup Leap, the #1 podcast interviewing startup founders who have taken the leap into starting their own businesses.
Here on The Startup Leap, we hear real, raw and relatable stories of these entrepreneurs, how they've navigated taking the leap and the decisions they've made. We're your hosts.
I'm Yvonne.
And I'm Maria.
And this is the Startup Leap podcast.
Yvonne and Maria are partners at LocalGlobe and OpenSeed VC, respectively. LocalGlobe and OpenSeed are independent of the Startup Leap podcast. Any statements made by Maria, Yvonne, or the Startup Leap guests are solely their view and are not advice. Endorsements by the Startup Leap, its guests, Maria and Yvonne.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Startup Leap, the #1 pod, where we have nuanced conversations with entrepreneurs who've taken their own leap to starting their companies. And through real, raw, and relatable conversations, we get insights from their journey that help you as you maybe take your leap too. I'm Maria, I'm your host, and today I have my co-host Yvonne here with me. We decided to do a little bit, something a little bit different, which was for you all to get to know both of us individually. So I will be interviewing Yvonne today as a guest on the Startup Leap, even though she's also a host. So I'm really excited about the conversation, mostly because obviously Yvonne and I have known each other for a while now, but there are a few things in the conversation that I think we would touch on that we haven't had the chance to kind of go deeply into. So I'm looking forward to that. So, but before we get on, Yvonne, very quickly, how would you introduce yourself? Who would you say Yvonne Bajela is?
So, Yvonne Bajela, I would say that, I am a wife, a mother, an investment partner. I'm a foodie, a mega foodie, and I love cooking. So, yeah, that's just a little bit about myself.
I love that. And I'm curious, I would love for us to explore your journey into VC very quickly, because for those people who know you, they know you either as, partner at LocalGlobe, a founding principal at ImpactX, and all your many incredible achievements even before then. So it would be great to understand what your story into venture was, because I think personally, I just think your background is incredible. You're also one of the most hardworking people I know, by the way.
You're one of the hardest working people I know.
We're doing it's you. No, it's fine. But it's true. And I admire that. So I would love for us to talk a little bit about what your story was into venture, because I think it's incredible. You've done many incredible things today. So tell us, were you always into investing? What was that journey into becoming an investor?
No, so I actually started out in investment banking, went into strategy consulting. And funny enough, I actually discovered VC on a plane, sitting next to an angel investor. He was telling me about what he did. And I'm an introvert. I don't really have conversations with people, like small talk, all that kind of thing. But we were really deep in conversations. He was telling me what he does, investing in companies and then taking them through to exit. And I was like, wow, this is incredible. And I went away. I was on the way to Ghana, so I spent the summer in Ghana, and I came back to London and I was like, yep, this is definitely what I want to do. So that was 2013. And at the time, like VC roles weren't really advertised. It was quite opaque at the time, compared to where the industry
also
is today.
A career path like that.
Exactly.
Yeah, as it is
and
now.
so I actually went about breaking into the industry by hitting up every single VC I could come across on LinkedIn.
Like after that plain conversation,
Yes,
something
I
just
was
switched.
like,
I mean,
this is it, light bulb moment.
Really?
So I came back to London and I was like, yeah, this is it. And it was around the time, so I spent the summer in Ghana, and it was around the time that a lot of VCs were starting to look at Africa. And so the whole of that summer I spent at the hubs in Accra, just getting to know startups, understanding how startups pitch and so on. And obviously I had developed really good presentation skills and that sort of thing. So I ended up being a mentor for startups in Accra.
Oh, interesting.
And that was kind of like my first foray into the world of startups.
I mean, first, speak to people on the plane. You never really know.
You never know.
What's going to happen.
Now I do it all the time because I'm just
Are you in contact with the person still?
I am.
Oh,
yeah.
that's such a full circle moment. I'm sure like them seeing the journey as well from the conversation. Did they know about like that sparked your interest in venture?
He had such a profound impact on me. So yeah, I'm so grateful to
And you said that you were in Accra. What's your connection to Accra? Were you just visiting? Was it family?
So I'm from Ghana. Okay. So every summer I used to go to Ghana. Okay. And I spent a couple of weeks there at that time and just immersed myself in the ecosystem. It was still very early in the ecosystem. As you can imagine, 2013, things hadn't really taken off in terms of venture in Africa just yet. But yeah, it was a great experience.
Interesting. Now tell me, you mentioned that you started cold emailing like people.
I did.
When you came back. What did you do at the time before venture was an option? What was it? What was your day-to-day job at the time before you considered venture?
So I was actually in strategy consulting. Okay. So I'd left investment banking. That's a whole other story.
Oh, great.
And I was in strategy consulting, had done it for quite a few years. I was, advising large corporates such as the Beers Group and so on. And I really loved working with companies. Yeah. But one thing that I really, really wanted to do was to go deeper. And oftentimes when you're a consultant, you deliver advice, but you don't know if they're going to follow through with it. And I really wanted to actually work closely with the companies to see how that unfolds once you deliver the actual consulting and how they execute on it. And so when I heard about the world of VC, I was like, this is incredible. I get to be with companies 0 to 1 from that early stage, depending on what stage you come in on. And I just thought it was perfect for me.
I love it. Now you are enthralled by the idea of venture. You've been to Accra. You're like, there's a booming tech ecosystem here. I want to be in the world of venture. How did you decide who to, send emails? What was your strategy and LinkedIn. How did that go?
It was LinkedIn. Still quite early on LinkedIn. Yeah. I think I'd only just come on LinkedIn at the time. So I'd literally go on and I was looking at like the Ford Midas list and I was just like, who are the people in VC that I need to reach out to? And so not many people responded, actually. I was like, hey, could we grab a coffee?
It only takes 1 year.
And the funny thing is, it actually took me 2 years to break into VC.
Really?
Yeah, it took 2 years. And I didn't break into a traditional VC role. I actually broke into VC by working at corporate VC.
Before that, during that 2 years, what sustained your enthusiasm? Like, you could have tried and been like, you know what, maybe this isn't for me, but why did you keep at it?
I just immersed myself. So I've always been someone that's really curious, loved reading, delving into content. Podcasts weren't really a thing at that time. And so it was very much like trawling the internet, reading about companies, understanding, like if I see a company's raised the latest funding round, I'll be like, I wonder what it was that made that VC invest in this company. And so I was very deep in just researching everything.
I love it. And then you broke into a corporate VC. How did that happen?
Yeah, so
what VC was it?
It's actually, so it's not actually a VC, it's Mitsui. So I joined Mitsui. It's a Japanese conglomerate, one of the largest top 5 conglomerates in Japan. And the way in which they operate is they operate across pretty much every industry. Name an industry, they operate within that sector.
Do they have a base industry that they typically...
No, so they do everything from like chemicals to agriculture to technology.
Interesting.
Pretty much everything, like seriously. And so I was asked to come and join their corporate development team. Okay. Initially, they actually hired me to focus on Africa. And that was... interesting experience because I was asked to come in, lead a team. I did not know anything about investing, obviously, other than all I researched. So I didn't know about the mechanics, the legals, all that sort of thing. So I was very much learning on the job. And yeah, it was such a steep learning curve. And I would say it's probably like one of the most pivotal moments in my career.
I can imagine. How old were you then?
I was 25.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then 6 months after I joined, they were like, okay, so we're going to broaden your remit. You're going to cover EMEA, so Europe, Middle East, and Africa.
Oh,
and I was
wow.
like, okay.
Wait, before you go on that, because I feel like we could go many places with that. Did you, how did Mitsui contact, like how did the person, was it via LinkedIn? Was it via one of your cold emails?
So again, it was very much like the hustle to get to know people. So Mitsui had an advisor, this lady called Rosalind, who is absolutely incredible. And I was introduced to her by my uncle. And so when I had a conversation with her, I was like, yeah, I really want to do investing. You know, if you come across any roles, do let me know. And so she introduced me to the team at Mitsui. And that's how that came about. And because I had done a lot of work in Africa over that 2-year period, they were like, yeah, come in, help us do investments in Africa. And with your local knowledge, help us scale up the platform that we've already developed there. So I joined the team, and within 6 months, I was told to broaden that, and ended up spending time in Israel, South Africa.
Amazing.
Spent some time living in Japan. It was incredible.
How long did you live in Japan for?
6 months.
Like you lived there?
As in, lived there.
Tell us more. I think because Japan is very specific. First of all, I love Japanese culture. I love anime.
Oh, it's incredible.
I've never been to Tokyo, but I would love to visit.
I always say, anyone who hasn't been there, you have to go there. It's like nowhere else in this world.
Did you start and then they said you have to go to Japan, or did you start and then after you worked
so it actually came about. So the way in which Mitsui operated is, obviously the brand wasn't as well known in Europe as it was in Japan, right? And so anytime we would make an investment, the key rationale to get us into deals would be, we will help you get into Asia.
I see.
And I'd say that's one thing that I have as an edge, because I guess most companies think about expanding to the US, but given the network and ties that Japan has to the rest of the Asian market, we would often invest in companies in UK, Africa, US, and then our pitch would be, we are going to help take your business to the Asian market, get you customers, get you in with the regulators. And so I'd done a few deals in the UK, and they said, look, why don't you go to Japan and help some of these companies with their expansion into Japan and broader Asia. And so that's why I was like, I had no responsibilities, didn't have any kids then. So I was like, I'm going.
Oh my gosh.
My mum thought I was crazy.
I was going to ask,
why are you flying across the world to go to work when you have a job that you could just do here?
And the time zone difference is quite steep, is it not?
No, it's a lot. Yeah.
Okay, so
staying in touch with like family and friends was like impossible.
Really hard.
Yeah.
And in Japan they speak Japanese. Like it's not English.
It's so funny actually, because to this day I speak barely any Japanese. And I remember the first week I got there, if I wanted to order food from a restaurant, I would literally have to go on the street and say, hey, do you speak English? Could you help me order some food, please? And this was like pre-Olympics.
Yeah.
And so, the whole not speaking Japanese thing was actually pretty difficult.
Especially if you're both living and working.
Yeah.
So the dynamics with colleagues, stuff like that, you saw that like language barrier as well. Interesting. So what's it like in Japan as a 25, 26-year-old who has just gotten the broader remit to build?
I loved it.
You did?
I loved it. It's just like nowhere else
What did you like
I've ever
about
been.
it?
One thing I'd say is like Japanese people are very hospitable. They really do welcome you.
Okay.
And even though I couldn't speak Japanese fluently, that wasn't a barrier.
I see.
It worked still.
I love it.
And so, I just loved my time there. Getting to know the food is amazing.
I bet. Given your food, I was like, that will come up.
And now, like, when I went to Japan, like, I always used to say to my colleagues, I totally get why you don't like UK food. Like, the food there is like 10 times better.
Is it just like ramen, sushi?
Oh, it's everything. Sushi, it's fresh. It's just so good.
Yeah.
And literally there's a restaurant every corner.
Okay. So 6 months you were there. When you, I think one of the things that I've seen with the conversations we've had, even on the Startup Leap, is with the entrepreneurs, people who took a leap, because that's a leap in itself. Like, it has all the anatomy of a leap, because you're going into unknown territory. It's a bit risky because you've never been to Japan. You're working with a whole new set of people in a bit of a new industry as well. So you were taking multiple leaps at the same time. When you look back on that time, what is something that comes to mind that probably was pivotal, but you didn't realize it at the time?
I think I've just always been very open, and I think this actually comes back to university, just being around individuals that my peers who were years ahead of me.
Yeah.
I would just see them being very open to taking risk. And I think that was really inbuilt in me. So I've never been afraid to take risk. I've always kind of thought, what's the worst that could happen?
I love that.
And that has, worked out pretty well for me.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about your time at Mitsui.
Yeah, so...
No. Go ahead.
Yeah, so Mitsui was a steep learning curve
Yeah.
because obviously it was my first step into the world of investing, right? And so I was asked to come in and lead a team. And obviously you can imagine 25-year-old leading a team.
How old? What was the average age of the people?
Probably
around
like 40.
you? Oh my God.
And it was like 99% men.
Oh my God. No shit to 40-year-old like men. But that, yeah, as a
So you can
26-year-old,
imagine.
that can be big.
And I'd probably say like 80% Japanese as well. So oftentimes what would happen is there would be a rotation where people would be sent to the UK for 4 years and then go back to Japan. And so a lot of the UK office was people from Japan that were there for a short period of time.
And what was that like? I think there's the cultural nuances, but then also there's the age, and you're also leading teams. You had a team, right?
Yeah, and I think that was one of the things that I found really challenging because I was coming in and obviously I didn't actually know what I was doing.
Because you had been in the world of investing prior, but not necessarily as an investor yet.
Exactly, right? And so I had to get up to speed very quickly, but I was very honest. I think one thing about myself is I'm very self-aware. So I had to be very honest with myself in terms of I don't know what I don't know.
Yeah.
But I'm going to get there.
Yeah.
And I think that throughout my career, just being very honest and having conviction in yourself is really, really important because I don't always have to be right. But when I am wrong, it's not the end of the world.
Yeah.
What is important is that I have the conviction in my ability to execute.
Yeah.
And so even though I didn't fully know what I was doing, I would quickly upskill. And I also relied upon those who are in the US, my counterparts doing the same role. So I'll jump on the phone and just be like, how do I do this? What documents do I need? How can I get in touch with the legal team? And so finding people that could help you.
Building a village around you of
so important, honestly. Yeah, I couldn't have done it without them. And so, yeah, I think that the first 3 months was very much like a steep learning curve, getting up to speed. And then the second half of that, so the 3 months when I was like deep in the role and I felt like I had got up to speed, it was very much like, like I've
now
got
you
this.
feel like, now it's usually the first 3 months in a company, you're like, oh my God, I don't know how to, kind of like figure out the information overload. I'm not sure. But I'm curious though, even with this, it was an investing role.
Yeah.
And Mitsui at the time invested in what areas? Like what was
everything.
It was everything. So
everything. Because Mitsui was basically investing like every sector off balance sheet. And so the investments that we made would either align with one business unit.
So strategic benefits.
And then there were financial investments as well. Okay. So when we invested in Wise, that was very much a financial benefit.
Let's talk about that.
It didn't align with the wider business.
So yeah, you mentioned Wise. How did that investment come about within Mitsui?
Yeah, so
you led that deal, right?
Yeah, so when I joined Mitsui, there wasn't really an investment strategy thesis. And so I came in and I was like, look, we're in London, the heart of London. It makes sense to look at fintech. They hadn't really done any fintech investments. And so I led the charge on going out there, sourcing fintech investments. I met the team of Wise and I was like, this is an incredible company.
What year was this? Where were they in their journey at this point?
So this was, I think, first met them in 2016. The company started in 2011.
Okay.
So it was a couple years in. But there was still a lot of talk around...
Is fintech is it
enduring? Like, exactly. Or are the banks
flash in the pan?
Are the banks gonna offer cheaper rates? Are they gonna, create a product that's like better, faster than Wise? And I just had such conviction in the team. I was just like, this is a company that is really, what stood out to me was the two founders, the marketing of the product. I think if you're building a consumer product, having a beautiful product is
counts.
Key.
It helps.
It makes such a difference.
Someone said recently that the MVP is dead. And this was then. I just feel like you're completely right. Like the bar is just higher and higher for what a good product
and
looks
their
like.
comms.
Yeah.
Their comms. Like it was quite controversial, their comms. Like they were basically like, this is what the banks are charging, this is what we're charging. But I loved it, and it really resonated with customers. And I was a customer myself, so I used the product and I was like, yeah, we absolutely need to invest in this. And so took it forward to the investment committee. It took a while, got rejected a few times, but we got there in the end.
I love that. I think that's another thing about investing. It's like the conviction. How do you build that when everyone doesn't seem to agree yet?
Yeah, and I think that throughout my time investing, oftentimes my best investments are quite controversial when it comes to the investment committee.
I love that. Because it's not a consensus asset class,
It's
especially
about
at
the
the early
outliers,
stage. Yeah. You can't have
And
that
oftentimes
grouping
they're not going to
thing.
be consensus bets, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
If they were, it would be priced in.
Exactly.
It'd be
So actually,
logical.
when we invested in Wise, one of the rationales, it was a very competitive round.
Yeah.
One of the rationales for us coming in was we would help them expand into Asia.
I see. So that was the edge.
Exactly. And so we invested and then helped with that expansion into Asia. And that's how I ended up in Japan, because
I see.
we had invested in a bunch of companies in UK, Europe, and the idea was we would help them expand into Asia. And so I spent some time in Asia, in Japan.
So you got into a little bit into the ops as well, like just maybe not.
No,
like
we
strategy.
would actually be seconded to work with teams.
Really?
There was 2 companies I was seconded to work with, and literally like roll our sleeves up. That was Mitsui's strategy. Like, we're going to send a secondee to come and work with you and help you actually expand into the Asian market.
So it was a bit like investing, but also consulting.
Yeah. Only that this time round you're
were
involved in
actually
the
executing,
execution.
yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. And then you invested in Wise, and obviously they've done very well.
Yes, they have.
I'm sure Mitsui is thanking you for that.
And it's funny because there's actually a few other companies so when I spent some time in Japan, we then started looking at the landscape and figuring out what can we do in terms of taking that know-how that we've developed in Europe and looking at fintech companies and bring that into Asia. And so did quite a few investments in Asia as well while I was there for 6 months.
Any notable ones you'd like to share? Like any ones that, maybe not even, just ones that you found interesting, that the story was very interesting as it kind of happened?
Yeah, so we invested in a company called Macari. It's basically like a flea market, like eBay.
Okay.
Did incredibly well in Japan. We actually worked on the expansion into UK. It didn't quite work, but
interesting.
But that was really interesting. There was another company called Money Forward that we invested in, which was like a fintech. There was quite a few that have done pretty all right, I guess.
On the converse, because anti-portfolio is a thing that every investor has to like think about and be like, oh my God, the ones I missed, the ones that went away. Do you have any?
I remember during my time at Mitsui, we actually were about to invest in Vinted. And
you didn't invest?
No.
I'm sure that's one you're like...
kicking myself.
Okay. And what did that teach you? Like, what was that experience like? How did it feed into your feedback loops of how you think about what good looks like in investing?
I think it gave me that confidence in my ability. I mean, I've definitely had losses, right?
Yeah.
But it just gave me that confidence that actually there's been a few times where, you know, my deals hasn't necessarily got through on the investment committee, but they would have been really great deals if we did do it. So I think it just gave me that additional confidence in my ability as an investor.
And it's so funny because I had an investor tell me something is like, the tragedy is if you didn't see it.
Yes, exactly. You got to see it.
Thesis, so you got to see it. So that's good.
No, definitely.
So tell me a little bit about your other investments. So you were at Mitsui, you did Wise, you did a few other investments. I really like the idea of like the investing and then, you know, that strategy of figuring out their entry points into Asia. Are there other, I guess, maybe investments? Because I know you invested in Marshmallow as well.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, so that was back in 2019 or 2020. This is actually really funny. So I was doing a deep dive on the insurance space and I was like, I wonder if anyone's trying to innovate the motor insurance market. And then I did a bit of research, as you do, came across Oliver and Alexander, and I was like, I've got to meet them. So I think I got introduced to Oliver, one of the founders, and kicked off with him immediately. And so, yeah, just was like, I have to do this.
It's interesting because the recurring theme is you speak with the founders and you just know.
You just know, yeah. That is it.
And it's funny also with this situation because it was thesis driven. Like, they didn't just stumble on you.
Yeah.
You were like, oh, I think that, which is why I think thesis driven investing can be powerful. It's a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
But it can be powerful because you've done research in that space. You've built the heuristic and context. So when you see something, you can almost instantly
it's
identify.
a prepared mind.
Exactly. Yeah. And with Marshmallow, when did you meet them? What year?
So 2019, I think. Yeah, 2019. 2019.
And where were they in their journey at the time?
They hadn't. So they just launched.
Oh, okay.
So I think that was I met them in October. I think they had launched earlier that year. So it's still quite early in their journey.
And now, where are they?
Yeah, so I think they're one of the, I don't know if I should say this, but they're one of the profitable insurtechs in the market today. Growing really well. Team is expanding massively. So yeah,
they've proven that it works. I love that. So let's talk a bit about your ties to Africa. And so you are Ghanaian, British.
I am, and my husband is Ghanaian and Nigerian.
Oh.
So a lot of people assume I'm Nigerian because of my surname.
Don't worry, you're Nigerian.
I am.
We've adopted you.
You've adopted me.
And fun fact, actually, my great-grandmother is Ghanaian. So Yvonne and I share that Nigerian, Ghanaian, like, heritage thing. I just love it. So did you, when you visited the continent in 2013, that whole time when you kind of like embedded in the ecosystem, I would love to talk a bit about not living in your home country, because we've seen a recurring theme across a lot of the entrepreneurs is that there is often a bit where they live home. It's not necessarily correlation or causality. It's just that it was there. But you'd done that with Japan.
Yeah.
Anywhere else?
Yeah, so I spent some time in Israel, South Africa, and Kenya.
Oh.
All varying periods, but that was through my experience with Mitsui. So when we would invest in a company, we would often go there. And obviously we had local teams as well. So we had offices in 7 countries within Africa. And so Kenya, Ghana were our African hubs. We also had South Africa, which operated pretty independently. But I would often spend time with the local teams as I was sourcing in the region. So yeah, that was really cool. And my first investment in Africa went terribly well.
Amazing.
No, terribly.
Not well.
Not well.
Okay,
sorry.
It didn't go well. Oh, I was like, okay, terribly.
It was in a 4G LTE company, and at the time, the whole thesis is like Africa is leapfrogging,
In
like it's going to
telco,
leapfrog from like 2G straight to 4G, and it was just really tough.
Oh, really?
Really
what
tough.
was what in retrospect, learnings, insights?
I think that we expanded too rapidly. So the company started in one market and had plans to expand into like 4 African cities from day one. And I think in retrospect, that was not a good strategy.
It's also infrastructure as well, so it would be very expensive.
And every market is so different.
Yeah.
So different. And so I think when we set out to basically, I mean, we already had early signals that the home market was doing really well. So we were like, let's just roll this out across all the other markets. So that was my number one lesson in expansion in Africa.
Yeah,
every market is so different.
It's very different.
So different.
And also, you don't even, if you rapidly expand to markets, you don't leave room for the compounding learnings that you kind of get in. Exactly. Because, you just kind of make mistakes that you've made in the other because you've rolled out in too many markets as well.
And I think another thing that we didn't do so well was hiring because of where people had previously worked. In hindsight, we would have done better if we just hired people that had that real grit
and hustle
and scrappy.
Yeah, that I know. I've had so many people. In my mind, I'm just like, it's not by where you worked.
Exactly.
In fact, sometimes
exactly.
Like, you've worked here, but tell me more.
So a lot of learning.
Over-indexing.
Like I said, you learn so much from your losses. And
I agree. So South Africa.
Yeah, so South Africa, we had a team based in Johannesburg. I'd fly in. I spent most of my time actually in Kenya, but I'd fly into South Africa whenever we were looking at deals in South Africa. Yeah. And I love Cape Town.
It's so beautiful.
I always say it looks like a postcard.
Oh my God, it's so beautiful. And South Africa has one of like the most incredible steak and wine
Yes,
I've ever
yes,
eaten in my
it
life.
does. Yeah. Look at us talking about food.
We've like this is now a food podcast. Okay, so that's incredible. And then you spent some time where else?
In
Kenya
Israel as well.
and Israel.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
and
yeah.
Israel, what was that like?
Oh, incredible.
Yeah.
So Israel as a country is relatively small, but the amount of innovation that comes out of it. So when I was there, just meeting with, and I think one thing that is pretty incredible about Israel is the fact that when you leave university, you tend to go into national service. And I think that equips individuals with such incredible experience so early on. And because it's such a small country, oftentimes people are building for it to go global from day one. And I think that mindset of building for the world,
a global company
or
from
for
day
the
one.
US, definitely plays into the success that the country's had.
Bit, I think, in like 2020, 21, where there was just like B2B SaaS companies like churning out of Israel. It's insane. Okay, and then you said you spent some more time in Kenya.
Yes.
And then you'd fly
So that was
South
when
Africa.
I was working with the 4G
company. And like for context for listeners who are not quite familiar with Africa, like South Africa obviously, but Kenya is East Africa. And East Africa, Kenya is actually quite a large market. It's one of the big four. And what was your experience there? That was your first time there as well.
I loved it. I remember I would like call my mum and be like, I love Kenya. I want to live here forever. And she'd be like,
she's like, you
what?
said that about Japan and South Africa.
No, but I loved Kenya. And I think that for me, what I found profound was even back then, M-Pesa.
Yeah.
The fact that it even like
it leapfrogged.
Even, I mean, if you think about it, even in the UK, it took some time for Apple Pay to really penetrate, right? And so
I wonder why. Is it like regulation, infrastructure, consumer behavior? What do you think?
I think it's consumer behavior, because it even took me a while. I was still using my Oyster card before I would use my Apple Pay. But in M-Pesa, like everywhere I would go, people would be paying with their mobiles.
It's also infrastructure, right? Like if you have a payment solution that has that much penetration, I mean, the entire thesis of M-Pesa, and in context, I think Pesa actually means money in Swahili. So like mobile Pesa, it's almost like your phone, like mobile money, essentially. And I think even in Francophone Africa, there's a lot of mobile money solutions. I would say like Africa fintech tends to leapfrog.
100%.
Mostly, I would say it's a combination of the fact that, one, it's a market that's having this moment the past 5-6 years of more like mobile penetration. So people's first interaction with any financial service is likelier to come through their telephones.
Exactly.
And then that evolved more to like digital banking. I still think that the infrastructure locally, like I've used bank accounts in the US and I'm like, I don't understand.
It's dire,
And I'm like, I'm coming from Africa that, everyone here say like Africa. I'm like this is so much better. Yeah.
Was it last year?
Yeah.
The instant payments launched in the US.
Literally.
And it was like a whole big thing on Twitter. And I was like, like
this was a while back.
This has been a thing in Nigeria for a while.
For a long time. And that's why I think you have like really incredible fintech startups that come off the continent, because they're actually solving like a direct need for a demographic that's consistently getting plugged into the internet. So they're really clever ways to do that. I wonder what total like brain spurt, but I wonder what like contactless and the evolution of payments is going to be like on the continent.
I think there's so much more room for growth. I mean, if you look at B2B payments, $1 trillion market, and still very much being done by cash. And that's fraught with challenges. That's, the risk of fraud, the risk of miscalculation, losses, just
poor tracking.
So much inefficiencies within that. So I think that's definitely an area that's still yet to innovate.
Interesting. Okay, so now all of these places you have experienced and lived, if you were to look back at all of them, what's the common theme across your experiences that you think is a gem that kind of lives with you, given there are many different places, different cultures, different people, different businesses, in fact? What would be your takeaway if you were to zoom out and say, this is a consistent theme that's kind of proven, or principle that has proven across all these various, experiences?
Yeah, I think that it's It's given me a very global mindset.
Yeah.
So I mentioned earlier that most companies, when they think about expansion, they think about expansion to the
Yeah.
US. But actually, I like to think about expansion in a broader context,
Yeah.
Asia.
Yeah. What does that look
Exactly.
like? Yeah.
And to be honest, if you're going to expand in Asia, you need a very strong local partner.
Yeah.
And I believe that's something that I have as a privilege, that I
Yeah.
have that network
Yeah.
within the Asian region. Particularly when you're looking at, African startups, sometimes it makes more sense for them to expand into the Asian market
Yeah.
versus the US,
Yeah.
right? And so just being open up to that idea, and I
like
think
that.
that's something, it's given me that real unique perspective that I probably wouldn't have otherwise.
I love it because it's true, and I've seen it directly. Whilst I was at branch, it was a San Francisco headquartered, but operated in different
Yeah.
countries. Started with Africa, but expanded into India, which is now one of the biggest parts of the business, I think. So it's interesting, that parallel that's
Yeah.
not as explored
Exactly.
as what people would consider, traditional expansion. Okay, that is incredible. Would you say that there's anything in your childhood? Maybe we go a little bit into that. What was your regular, day in your childhood like? Were there any telling signs of this, I guess personality trait of being like, oh, is it risky? Oh, let's try it.
Let's go for it. So my childhood, so brought up by my mother and father, South London, council estate. My mother was always a hustler, so she would do like 3 jobs, and I'm like, I don't know how you do it. She was
Like-
always selling something.
I feel like this is African mothers. The entrepreneurship is in the DNA. You have
Honestly,
ancestral
We would always be going to
Edge.
someone's house, and she'd be selling something. I'm like, oh, I want to go home. On the other side of that, my dad, he just made me love numbers.
Ooh, what did he do?
So I just remember being very young, and I kid you not, from the age of 8, we would literally be reading the Financial Times together, reading The Economist. And so from a very early age, I knew that I wanted to work in the world of finance. And he always made me believe that you could change the world from the aspect of, finance.
Yeah.
And so that's something that I always knew I wanted to do. That had quite a big impact in me in terms of what I went on to study, and the decisions I've made.
What did you study in undergrad?
Economics and finance.
Of course. That makes sense. And you got out with first class honors as well. So were you studious?
It's really funny though, because actually, so I did economics at A level, but my sixth form that I attended didn't offer it as an A level. So I did it independently, and they thought I was crazy. They're like, why would you want to do that? And I was like, I really want to do economics. My dad has like made me obsessed with economics. So I studied it.
That's another
independently.
signal, like being able to go against the herd for what you wanted to do at the time. Sixth form, that's like 16, or is it 17?
Yeah. So 16, 17.
Yeah. And that was extra work, I bet, like having to study.
Do you know what? I just loved it so much that
it didn't
to
feel
me,
like
it didn't
work.
feel like work.
I see.
But then all my peers are like, why are you doing that? That's so strange. And I mean, that's been like a common thread, because I remember when like kids would play out when I was younger, and I would be at home with my dad reading The Economist, and people would be like, okay.
Oh my God. Oh my God. And you were enjoying it.
And from a very early age, he would invest in stocks and would like follow the stock market. And just having that exposure so young, I think is absolutely incredible. Looking back on
I
it.
think parents imprint a lot
Absolutely.
on their kids.
Yeah.
How would you say your dad influenced you?
He just, well, first of all, he would always say, Yvonne, knowledge is power. As most African parents do say.
Yeah. But it is true.
And so he really made me enjoy just constantly learning. And that's one thing I've taken away from him. And I think it's so important in this VC industry, just having that intellectual curiosity.
I agree.
So I'm constantly like digging deep into different areas, and learning new things. The learning never stops.
Yeah, it really doesn't. And because things continue to change, you have to keep keeping up. And in terms of family dynamics, are you the first? Are you the
So I'm
where
the
are you?
second.
You're the second of
I'm
how
the
many
second of
kids?
2. So it's me and my sister.
What was that
so
like?
I was spoiled a bit.
Really? What's the age difference between you and your sister?
5 years, so quite a big gap. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, and would you say, how would you say, I mean, your dad influenced you on the curiosity, I think that finance, that early, would I say nurturing of the numbers of how that translates into value in the world.
Yeah, and he also instilled in me the belief that I could do anything I wanted. So if there's anything that I would set out to do, he'd be like, you can do it, Yvonne. You can do anything you put your mind to. And I always used to have that playing in the back. Even to this day, I'm like, I can do anything I put my mind to. And so whenever I've made decisions in life, I think that also, you know, plays into why I'm so open to taking risk. So my father passed away 5 years ago. And again, that probably had pretty significant impact in the way I think about the world.
How did it influence you? How did it change you? Did it change you?
Oh, absolutely. And I think grief has a way of doing that. So when he passed away, I think it just made me really reflective on life. And it gave me a massive sense of urgency. So I was already someone that was open to taking risks. But when he passed away, it made me just think life is actually really short. And I never want to be in a place where I have any regrets about not doing something, trying things out. And so, yeah, that's why I think it just made me even more open to taking leaps and taking risks.
That makes sense to me.
And I look back and I'm just so grateful for that.
Yeah. And I'm curious, when in your transition, in your journey, did this happen? Was it when you were at Mitsui? Was it when after that? Like,
so it was actually when I was at ImpactX.
Oh, yeah. Let's talk about ImpactX.
Yes.
So what was the transition like from Mitsui to ImpactX? How did that happen?
So,
and tell us a little bit about ImpactX as well.
So ImpactX, UK-based fund, started in 2019, focused on backing underrepresented entrepreneurs in Europe. So how did that happen? I was working with Mitsui, had been there for, I think, 4.5 years. Brexit happened, and the team at Mitsui were like, okay, let's move the European headquarters to Germany. And I was like, I mean, I've spent a lot of time in Germany, had a team there, but I was like, I don't really want to move to Germany. So I started thinking about what my options were. A friend of mine actually introduced me to Eric Collings, the CEO of ImpactX. And at the time, so this was back in 2018 when he was still scoping out whether the fund was feasible. So I started having several meetings with him. We'd probably meet like once every 2 weeks. And then he would ask for my advice on investing in Europe and, you know, my view on the landscape. And then one day he was just like, why don't you join me? Why don't we do this together? So that was 2018. I officially joined 2019. And yeah, I think that it was a little scary because it was a new fund, no money.
Brand new fund. There is
brand
that
new
risk.
fund. And so
but what about the opportunity attracted you? I mean, there was the Mitsui situation, and it was like you needed to figure something out, but you still had to choose.
And I did think that. So obviously, ImpactX focused on underrepresented entrepreneurs, and for me, I just felt like I had seen that there is bias in the industry, and I felt that ImpactX could be a solution to that, to address the disparity in funding. And so, in joining ImpactX, it was very mission driven, actually.
And you were there for 3 years, 2019, all the way to 2022. And what would you say? Because I think, even from my experience, joining a fund and building a fund are two different things.
Absolutely. And actually, it's actually similar. Like I always say this, like people don't realize that when you're building a fund, it's like building you are building a company.
You are building a company.
So from the very beginning, it was like building processes, building out the comms, pretty much building out everything, right? And so that was interesting. I love doing it, and I think the 3 years I was there, we built it up to a good place, and I just felt like it was time to move on.
And how did you? What was the, I guess, like rationale transitioning to what next you wanted to do? What was good? What did good look like at the time? Moving on from ImpactX to whatever it would have been at the time.
Yeah, so it was 2021. I had my son, and I feel like having children has this way of making you really reflective on what you want. And so I spent my time while I was away on leave just thinking, what does my next 10 years look like? And obviously I'd worked in corporate VC, I'd worked at an emerging manager. I really wanted to, I guess, work at a fund that is just a traditional
global
VC. And so I had several conversations with the team at LocalGlobe, felt that it was a really good fit, and here I am today.
I love it. It's funny because I think the podcast really says the startup leap, but there are leaps in people's stories, and I'm seeing several in yours actually.
Just
now that we're
continuous
talking,
leaps.
yeah. So I'm curious, maybe before we even go into further into your VC journey, did you ever think of starting something? Like, did you ever have the entrepreneurial bug in a traditional way where you were like, I think this is the problem, I want to build something that solves it?
Yeah, so 2012, 2013, I actually started what was at the time, I guess, I was trying to build Bloomberg for Africa.
Oh.
And at the time, I felt like there was just this dearth of data on the continent. And obviously data and economic development comes hand in hand. So my whole thesis was, if we can solve this data issue, it would enable better economic development. And so what I did was I assembled a team, I got a designer, started working on the product, and realized very early on that the data was going to be so hard to come by because it would require collaboration with governments. And I had some initial meetings with the Ghanaian government, with various government bodies and development agencies, and just realized that it was going to be a massive challenge. Yeah. And so decided...
And 2013 was a different... I mean, I think I have seen startups more recently tackle
there
this
are,
problem,
yeah. But
2013 was a different time. Yeah.
I mean, the data just wasn't there.
Yeah, probably too early.
Yeah. So timing.
No, but I mean, that's also a good point. It's like you could have the, like, it could be right, but the timing is so important. But that's incredible, because I do think the thesis is right that there is a data gap, and with
Massive
more
data
visibility
gap.
brings more comfort.
Yeah.
To financial investors. Okay, interesting. So now back to investing. In your journey, so right now you're a partner at LocalGlobe. Tell us a little bit about LocalGlobe, what it focuses on, what you do there.
Yeah, so LocalGlobe started back in 2015. So the two founders, Robin and Saul Klein, they spun out of Index Ventures. It's pre-seed and seed fund, but there's various other vehicles now. So the pre-seed and seed vehicle, LocalGlobe, is the primary vehicle, and there's a later stage vehicle, Latitude, which is like Series B plus, and there's a pre-IPO vehicle called Companies that I say 2 to 3 years away from IPO. And so joined in 2022 and done a few investments, but yeah, really great team as well.
I love it. And LocalGlobe you look at Europe and Africa there?
Yeah, so I would say a couple of the investments I've done have been in Africa and some in Europe as well.
I'd love to talk a little bit about those two brains, the Africa and Europe, because it's very peculiar.
You do have to switch a little bit.
Yeah, it's what that's my headspace. I think of it as both, but I'm curious, how do you see, how do you think of balancing both mentally in terms of when you're looking at African startups and when you're looking at European startups? What are your heuristics there?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I can give you an example, actually. So oftentimes when I meet African companies, they are building something that has already been built in Europe, right? Yeah. And so it's great because you have that heuristic and you have that ability to say, okay, this is what I've seen work in Europe. And obviously there's the local nuances, but there's actually a lot of learnings that could be taken from, say, Europe, US, and so on, and applied to the African continent, particularly in the space of fintech. So that's worked really, really well.
I love that. And I think you're absolutely right. I have seen the US Africa corridor explored more in context of pure venture. But I see, I think that there's a lot more opportunity for the Europe-Africa corridor to be explored.
Definitely.
Aside from the impact narrative, which I think is important in and of itself. But
and I think for me, just on that in particular, I do believe that venture has the ability to create positive impact. And so I don't always feel as if that label needs to be applied.
It's like if you are building a solution that solves a problem in Africa, by inference, you're probably you're being impactful already. Yeah. I love it. And I'm curious, maybe even more on your investing journey, because I think you've invested in some incredible companies. You invested in TransferWise. You invested in Move. You've invested in even recent companies that I suspect are going to be big.
I pray so.
So tell me, why do you think that you've been successful in spotting these companies?
I mean, I've had losses, and I always say that you learn so much more from your losses than you do from your wins. I think that when I started out investing, I used to over-index on the market and the opportunity. I've been investing since 2015 now. So if you think about the time span, over the time, I've realized increasingly that you bet on the founder and only on the founder. Because at the end of the day, especially when you're investing at pre-seed stage, you just don't know whether the market's going to take to the product, right? And so if you back an exceptional team, they will navigate it, figure it out. And so I think that just in focusing on the team, that's where I've found that, I've made some bets I'm really proud of.
I completely agree. And I think we were talking about this last night as well, in terms of founder profiles and the fact that you hear of some stories today and you hear that they heard no's. And you're like, that's insane. But the benefit of retrospect is that not all is clear.
Exactly.
And it makes sense. But oftentimes the founders usually have, and maybe we can go into that. What about the founders? If you were to look for patterns, what specifically about the founders do you see as a leading indicator into that magic factor that contributes to that success eventually?
Yeah, so for me, it's often clarity of vision. So you meet an entrepreneur and they can almost see crystal clear what the world should look like with their product in 10 years' time. And oftentimes it may be a space that I know nothing about, but they're able to just clearly convey exactly what they want to build, why it needs to exist. I remember there was a founder that I met with years back, and he was building in the supply chain space, and I was just like, I looked at the deck before I met him and I was like, okay, this is interesting. By the end of the meeting, I spent 3-4 hours just researching the space. That's the kind of founders I want to back. Founders that really draw you in. Their ability to storytell is so important, because at the end of the day, you're continuously selling as a founder. You're selling to your potential employees, you're selling to investors. You have to sell your story, and so that ability to storytell is so key. But I think that clarity of vision is everything. Just when I think through all the incredible founders that I've backed, that is definitely something that's consistent. And obviously that grit as well.
Hustle.
It's so important, because building a company is not easy. Like, so hard. And oftentimes that's something that's really hard to assess, actually.
I was going to ask, I was like, how do you test for grit?
And so one thing that I always love to do is get to know the entrepreneur for who they are as a person. Is there something in their childhood that impacts who they are? Sometimes it's that they have a chip on their shoulder and that's what's driving them. Sometimes it's something that happened in their childhood that's really spurring them to want to change the world and build something that really makes a difference. And so for me, just getting to know the individuals, who they are and what really drives them is really, really key.
I love that. And maybe the converse, what have you found has been like the Achilles heel that has, hurt potentially what would have been incredible founders of startups in their journeys?
Yeah, I think one thing that I see a lot is, as it's about the team, right? And so hiring for the wrong people or co-founder breakups is something I see a lot. Not focusing on the customer.
Projecting on the customer.
I think it's just right. Exactly. I think one thing that is really, really helpful is just get a product out, get some customer feedback, and continuously iterate on that. But yeah, you have to put your customers first. I think in this world where you see all the headlines on TechCrunch, this company's raised 50 million, this company's raised X, Y, Z, you can fall into this habit of just focusing on the optics of fundraising. But I always say, when you fundraise, that's just one milestone. The work really starts once that money's in the bank, because then you have to deliver on that.
And it's so funny, because I think, like, even with fundraising, we've seen over and over again that all fundraising does is buy you time. If you're doing the wrong thing, time doesn't matter.
Exactly.
So tell me, let's go a little bit more personal. What's your family like? Like right now, you mentioned earlier that you're a mom, you're a wife. How long have you been married? How many kids do you have? How has that influenced who you are? The one thing that, oftentimes on podcasts, you're like, oh, she's a woman, please don't ask her. Like, how do you balance being a mom?
There's no such thing as balance.
But I just want to spotlight a bit more color into who you are as not necessarily just an investor and entrepreneur.
Yeah, so I have a 3-year-old and an 8-month-old. And I think that becoming a mother has definitely changed. Again, as grief did, it just gives you a more
nuance.
And it actually gives you a greater sense of urgency, right? And I have to be very intentional with my time. So
moms are like the most incredible I don't know how Yvonne
honestly
does it. Like, I'm just like, sometimes I'm like, I don't have kids and I have this time, but how are you?
I'll be like bathing the kids, sending an email, sending text, cooking dinner at the same time.
That is insane. I feel like once you're a mom, there should never be a doubt
and
as to your ability to multitask. It should be like, oh, you're a mom. Oh, great. Yeah, we know that's ticked.
It's a must. I always say, like, every morning in my house was like a marathon, just getting everyone
ready. I can't
but
imagine.
No, it's great. I love it. And yeah, I feel like it's just made me very intentional with my time. I'm very intentional about how I allocate my time, what I say yes to, what I say no to. Before having kids, I was at a lot of events. Don't do that anymore. So I'm just really intentional.
Yeah, with the decisions I make. I bet. This is incredible. We're now nearing the end, but before we do that, I'd love to do a few reflective exercises. Let's just go back. If you were to go back to 2010, very early in your journey, before you knew VC was on the cards for you, if you could go back, time machine, it's opened. Yvonne now steps out and she's looking at Yvonne then, and she has 30 seconds. What would you tell her?
I would say, don't be afraid to be who you are. Who you are is your superpower. I remember when I started out in banking and strategy consulting, I'm quite a soft-spoken person. Yeah. And so oftentimes I remember when I worked in banking, my mentor would say to me, Yvonne, you need to be more aggressive, assertive in the way you speak. And I remember I'd actually try to do that. Yeah. You can imagine how stupid I sounded. And I look back and I'm just like, actually, who I am is who I am, and I love it. And
you don't have to shout to be assertive.
Exactly.
Like, you don't have to be forceful to be assertive.
Exactly. And so, yeah, that's one thing that I would say to my younger self.
I love that. And if you weren't investing, nothing to do with the world of finance or economics or anything like that, if in a parallel universe, in the multiverse, what's Yvonne doing?
Do you know what? I think I might be like a chef or
really
something to do with food.
Oh, that would be nice. You'd invite me to your 3 Michelin star restaurant. I would eat it. I would give feedback. Or like maybe you'd be like Gordon Ramsay, like a superstar chef. I could see that.
I would definitely something to do with food.
Okay, I love it. And for those potentially out there, either still thinking about venture in this climate, or thinking about taking a leap in doing something that's a little bit scary, a little bit new, what would you say?
Don't be afraid. Just take the leap. You have nothing to lose. What's the worst that could happen?
I love that. Well, I think that's a wrap. Thank you so much for tuning in. It was lovely to have you. It was lovely to have Yvonne. I've enjoyed this conversation. And just a few quick points. Remember, it is the Startup Leap pod on all channels. So go on our website, which is thestartupleap.io, but also go on our socials, Startup Leap the pod on YouTube, on TikTok, on Instagram, everywhere. And tell us what you think. Tell us about other speakers you would love on the show as well. And see you next time. Thank you, Yvonne.
Thank you. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Startup Leap, TSL for short. Leave a review, tell us what you think of this episode on all of our platforms at the Startup Leap Pod. Do you have a question? Ask us and we'll ask our guests. Go to thestartupleap.io. See you next time.